Okay, hopefully. Oh, goody goody. Oh, it's always positive, isn't it, when well, you managed to go live. I just now need to find you on my phone, and then we might be able to see things better. It's never quite guaranteed. There we are. No. Let's see. Excellent, we have found. That's always helpful. Every time I go live, Facebook does something different to me. There we are. Good, I can now turn that off. There we are. So I now know that I can hear myself. Well, that means you can hear me. So let's just wait a little bit and see who comes in. Let's just move those glasses out of the way. It's going to be a bit bright. Hopefully once the glare from the plastic is out of the way, it won't be so bad. There we are, there we are, there we are. I'll move that, and then we might be able to see comments. That's always also a helpful activity. Good afternoon, Sylvia. Welcome, my darling. Thank you for joining me. It's Easter Sunday. I don't know how many people will join us. It means different things for different people, of course, in different parts of the world. I know for the Greek Orthodox it's a really important celebration, less so in the UK, more a family time. Good afternoon, Sheila. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let me just do a little bit of strategic moving around. Or a lot of strategic moving around. There we are, there we are. Let's just shuffle some of this lot out of the way. There we are, there we are. We might find ourselves driven mad today with all of this. Thank you. Good afternoon, Sheila. Welcome, my darling. Right, eeny meeny. Let's just not lose all of these pieces, and we're keeping it reasonably simple today. Well, I think it's reasonably simple. Of course, that doesn't mean it will be for everyone else, but I appreciate that. But anyway, good afternoon, Deb. Welcome to the live. I hope that you are well. Let's get rid of that. We're not doing a reverse canvas today. I just thought, so some of you will maybe have worked out, I know, and some of you won't. I've been asked to do TV for personal impressions next week. So we're sent a huge amount of the latest graphic 45 even. We'll put the brain in gear. Stamperia products, and I've got samples to make if we're honest about it. So here we are. So we're going to go really simple, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not effective, and I think it's good to visit simpler techniques, because not everyone wants to layer medium on medium on medium, and not everyone is confident with blending papers. So I've just got a sheet of 12 by 12 papers here. I think it's a bit off the pattern, off the shiny bits, it won't be such a problem, which I'm going to trim to size to fit the A4 canvas that I've got, and then we're going to do, as I say, some simple stuff today. I think I might need a new do I really want to keep that tiny bit and answer on a postcard? No, don't answer that on a postcard. The answer is very definitely, I'm not going to be keeping that. So before I do anything else, I'm just going to grab an archival ink pad. Oh, get rid of this. So it's an A4 pad of paper. That can go there. can go there. I don't need it to be entirely even. I just want it to blend in, and all I'm doing is a felt pad is popping that onto the edges of there. That is ground espresso archival ink, and I have some faded jeans archival ink in a little one, so we'll just add some of that into there just to cover some of those areas up, mix it up. These colours are both in the paper protection, so that's why I've chosen them, but obviously you do you, if you'd rather get the paint out, but if you're a paper crafter you might have ink pads when you might not have those. So there we are, that's uber quick, simple to do, and sometimes you just need things that are quick, don't you? So here hello Mari, good afternoon. There we are. So this is my piece of scrapbook paper, and I've deliberately chosen this one because it's got like a ground at the bottom and some sea, and it's a bit abstract, and that's fine. That's the whole plan for the process. Now let me just take some of, I'm going to just grab the distress photo, and I'm just going to come in from the edges. Vintage photo is one of my go-to colours. I use it for lots of things. So we're just going to edge around there. That will get rid of some of that nasty white border that always shows when you're using pads of paper. There we are. Yeah, we're going to have some. No, it's not too bad actually. It's not too bad. There we are. So I'll pop that there, pop that there. How is California today, Diane? I hope it is lovely. Not too hot, not too cold. Should be quite nice, I think, if you should be in the middle of your summer. So that's just added a little bit of ink around there. Important, for those that don't know, I craft in a conservatory. I've got the doors open, and that means my ink pads, if I'm not careful, will dry out, and that's not necessarily so good. So let's just add a little bit of colour around the edges of this. I know it's going to look a bit messy, but most of this isn't not going to be seen, so it doesn't really matter if it's not fully blended. It's just so that if I don't get it all stuck down entirely, you don't just see white. There we are. And I could add some blue as well if I really wanted. Good afternoon, Rita. So there we are. So that's given that little bit of colouring. We're going to be doing with lots of paper craft. I've just got my pair of scissors in my hand. Now, I'm very used to doing this, but do be very careful. But I find this the easiest way of just adding, a little bit of texture. There are special tools for it, but life's too short to go find them. They're probably not very far away, but I've always used just a pair of scissors to ruffle edges up, rather than anything more complicated. And you really can see just with a pair of scissors how textured that edge becomes. Hello Connie, welcome. Good afternoon, Laurie. Thank you for joining us today. So there are a couple of completely new concepts in the latest Stamperia paper releases. One is MDF villages, or scenes that are designed to work together, but actually, to be fair, I think you don't need to use them, and there's several different elements in each pack, making them reasonably economical. And the other is a sticker sheet which feels almost waxy, which is rather lovely. I don't tend to use stickers. I have an aversion to shiny, but they're not shiny. They're waxy and they feel quite nice. I'm just going to pop a little ring of glue. I'm just using a PVA glue. Use whatever is your glue of choice. Obviously, different things for different people. Let's just pop some in here. I don't want it falling apart. Certainly don't want it falling apart on Cello Telly on Thursday. There we are. You don't need masses. Glue is sticky and it will spread and stick. So that piece can now go nicely onto there. Let's just give it a little push down. There we are. Make sure it's properly stuck. There we are. So we've now got a nice background piece for our make. And then we're going to have an awful lot of gluing, cutting, and I didn't think this through, did I? I really didn't. I've popped my mat here so that I didn't have glare, but I'm going to need to actually have that out. So these are all in the Seascape collection. Okay, these pieces all come in the Seascape collection, so there's quite a lot of them. It's a recipe for causing chaos, isn't it? Anyway, so but they're relatively small pieces. This one is just over 6 inches tall, and the others are smaller. So I have gone to the 8x8 papers. I used the 12x12 for the background, and I've deliberately chosen some that blue mixture, and then the brick type effect papers for different parts of here. Happy Easter, Anna. And we're going to have quite a lot of cutting and chopping out. So I know I want my roofs and those elements to all be in one of the papers. Okay, then this is my suggestion, is that you choose a paper that you like, and that we're not going to need big pieces for any of this. So, and I've chosen this because it vaguely resembles tiles. So if I pop this onto here, I want that way round. Okay, so that's, so why have I done, I want that piece to sit like this on my shape, but I want the other side showing, which means it's that side that needs to be glued. The others are reasonably symmetrical. There is one more that will cause me a problem, so let's just pop that right up there so we waste as little of our paper as possible. And I will, as I say, I will have to move that to okay, out of the way. Yeah, my grey mat out of the I've got a cutting mat on the floor, a blue one. What I'm wanting to do is avoid shine, because I think it's quite difficult otherwise. There we are, so that piece can go onto there. We'll just give these all a squash down, make sure that they are going to stick in place from there. Now this piece is one again that I need to have sided. Okay, so that's the way I'm going to want it sitting up. So it's this side that needs the glue on. And if we get it wrong, we'll know about it, won't we? But there we are, so that can go there. These won't matter because these are parts of the lighthouse, and the reason I'm ignoring that is that this paper is definitely directional. There we are. Okay, so that will all work quite nicely, and that's going to give me the darker blue on the surface, and I am literally just going to chop this here because I need to flip it round for the next bit. Okay, so that can then sit there and dry. There's no point in trying to cut those out yet. They need to dry in place. Okay, so let's just put the main bodies of that out of the way, and then we have some doors and some windows, and just because it's going to be easier, I'm going to have them so that this is the side that is positive on them. So let us just right, there we are. So let's again go for maximising the uses of our paper. That can go there. We could spend ages lining it all up so that we know that we've got whole images. Life is too short for me today to do that, and there's quite a lot of bits, and you really don't need me to be here forever doing all of these. So I'm keeping the roofs the same and the windows the same. If that makes any sense whatsoever. There are coordinating chipboards for some of the pieces, so again you can choose what you want. There we are. Let's just pop that there, and then what you can see, actually these are not going to take massive amount of paper. There we are. I'll do all of these. They might take a bit of time cutting out and filing, but hey ho! There we are. So that piece can now go there, and let's just chop that and leave those to dry. So you just need to think about the angling of things as you do them. Okay. And of course you could add stencil, you could choose to use media techniques and papers and all sorts with them. It's entirely up to you. And then I've got two different papers that I'm going to mix up for these elements, and I'm not afraid of that. This is double-sided from the 8-inch paper pad. And I'm wanting the blue side on there, so let's just make sure, yeah, that will work. So let's just now make sure that we have a reasonable amount of glue on here, on this piece, so it adheres nicely. And thankfully nothing's going to take very long to dry in this weather, because it is very warm in the UK. There we are. Up to the edges being the most important piece, so that piece can go onto there like that. That house needs to be that way, which means that is the side that needs to be painted face down with the direction I want. And you could just do this out of one piece of paper. I've deliberately gone with the 8-inch paper pad because I think the pattern size is more suitable for the size of the pieces that we're going to be using. There we are, that can sit there. We'll pop that, just let that grab Okay, and then let's just take this piece with the old wall and we're going to pop these two houses onto here. So there we are. And remember, it's the opposite side that's going to be visible. There we are. That can sit there. And so can this one. Good afternoon, Karen. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Easter Sunday. I trust that you are okay. Hello, Uta. There we are. So that can go onto there. And let's just do a little bit of an extravagant chop. I just want to get the paper out of the way. Okie dokie, so that can sit over there, and then we're going to give them a little bit of pressure to hopefully have them all sat down. Sometimes you just, I don't want to be uber extravagant, but I do need a bit of room on my desk for a little bit of working. And I'm going to pop these to the side deliberately, so that they've got a chance to dry properly before I start cutting and filing, of which there might be a little bit. Anyway, I've not got masses of resin today, but in the mould, one of the moulds, there is well, there are, even to be more grammatically correct, some tiny shells, and I'm focused. Most of the colour is going to come from the die cuts. I'm not generally a great fan of die cuts, but these have been cast with amazing casting resin, which is a rapid cure, dries white resin, and technically you can paint them without any problem. But I always prefer to add some primer to it, so that's what I'm doing. I am actually just using the Pentart Primer Paste Soft Gesso, but you could use the classic gesso, you could use any of your primers, including the new deep primer if that's what you want to do. You don't need a special primer for these at all. And we're not going to have masses because, as I say, I've pared this right back today. It's definitely more paper craft than anything else. There are several moulds in the collection, as you'd expect from Stamperia, so I have plenty to choose from. So there we are. Let's just pop that over there, and let's just give this with all. And I've managed to leave one of my MDF pieces, so whilst those have a little dry, what do I want my boat? I think I like my boat to be more blue, so I want my boat facing that way, so that is the way that has to go. Oh dear, excuse me. Oh, not that it would matter if it was round the wrong way. Just need to think about the composition a bit more differently to the way that we had it initially planned. But there we are. Let's pop that over there. I'll leave that there, that over there, pop that over there. We're trying not to have too much of a heat gun out today. She says famous last words. So I'm working on a silicone mat, which means I can safely heat dry these and give these all a little bit of a squash. They're drying quite nicely, so we can get those all dried. We're doing lazy crafting. Well, lazy, time efficient, I don't know. You call it what you want. The simple techniques. Take a bit of love, yes. but that's always worthwhile, isn't it? So let's just get these dried nicely. Thank you, Sheila. There we are. I know the lovely Sarah Rochett, who normally joins us, messaged me earlier on today to say that she would be watching on Rewind because, having not been able to get to her mum's for a little bit, she's now managed to get, she's going to see her mum today, and that's obviously way more important. Right, let's find a little brush, because these are not big pieces, and I have some golden stand, but you could use an ivory. It's a little softer, and I'm still on use up what I have, rather than having anything more complicated. So the golden stand is a bit richer than ivory, but it's going to do the job. I quite like it as a colour, but as I say, I continue to be on mission use up what I've got. So could I have chosen a different colour? Yeah, absolutely. But shells aren't white, and they're not really ivory either. So we're gonna go with it. The only pesky thing about these is that they're quite diddy. We might be being very late. You see, there really isn't very much paint left in there. Yeah, that's okay. I couldn't do a live and not have any resin pieces, could I? No, of course not. Good afternoon, Faith. Welcome, my darling. Thank you for joining us. I trust that your part of the UK is nice and warm, not too hot. As I say, we won't be forever painting resin pieces. These are tiny shells, and that's don't think I want the bumblebee in my paintwork. Just as well, I'm not worried about them. There we are. There we are. There we are. So I'll just give them a nice coat, and we'll end up with sticky mucky fingers, because that's just what you do, isn't it? Of course it's what you do. Of course it's going to happen, isn't it? There we are. There we are. You see, look at those sticky mucky fingers. So let's just give these all a good clean up, and then we'll give those a little bit of a blast dry. Let's say then we're going for simple makes. I think I might be putting that pot in the bin, because I really think there's not nothing, it's not worth saving. No, there we are, bin it is. Get this to dry. I'm not intending being live, because I'm not intending being live for ages, and it's 3:30 already. So, will I be live for a bit longer than I thought? Yeah, absolutely. I am going to be live for longer than I thought. Projects take as long as projects take, I think. Yeah. To get this bit out of the way, then I can then pop these out of the way and then swap to a different mat. Let's find something that looks nasty, she says, as in a brush that looks nasty. cream crackered. There we are, that will work. I just want to add, I don't want my look at that. Tells you how thick, how hot it's been, isn't it? Let's get rid of that. This is another pot that I think might just, that doesn't look as if it's quite as empty as the other one. There we are, so that can go on there. That's biscuit or cookie, I think is its current name from Stamperia. There we are. We're just going to add a little bit of dry brushing onto these, just add in some texture so that they're not a flat colour, because they're not, are they? Shells aren't one colour. There we are. And a scratchy brush will work perfectly for this. I don't want, I want almost no paint on my brush. I just want it to pick up some of the surface details rather than having lots, so they look a bit more like proper shells. Yeah, I could get out 5 more colours and have each one differently, but yeah, hey ho. Yeah, sometimes you just need to be kind to yourself and not stress the little stuff. There we are. There's lots and lots of details on these moulds, so it is worth adding the dry brushing to bring out the colour. There we are. And the details. You think, is it worth it for such little moulds? But each of these will add. I do have some natural elements out as well. Just pop those over there, and that is the sum total of the painting that I'm intending doing today. Oh, who would have believed it? Right, let's just pick up another wipe, get rid of some of this mess. There we are. Right, and demuck my fingers because I definitely don't want stuff on these. Right, and the bit that's going to take us a while, I feel, is going to be the cutting out and the sanding and inking of edges. So let's just pick up a cutting mat that isn't going to end up glaring, because if I swap to my normal mat, then we're going to have bright shine from, there we are, let's move that up onto there, that will work, from, click that into place, from and a sharp knife. A sharp blade is definitely far safer than a blunt blade, and so we're going to have a lot of this to do. Well, right. And it doesn't matter if we don't get all of this off evenly, because I'm going to sand it down anyway. There we are. And of course I'm eternally happy with a scalpel in my hands, because well, why wouldn't I be, having been a surgeon through my trade, through my working life. But if you're not, then you just need to take your time with doing this. That's my boat on the floor, right? Let me just get that, because by the time I get to it, I'll have forgotten, won't I? Of course I will. Of course I will. And I'm going to stand up for this bit. As I say, we're going to be doing some trimming anyway. So that's that side. Spin, 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 spin. I normally use a glass cutting mat, so I have to say that I generally prefer a glass cutting mat, but I do think that we'll just end up with horrible glare, so that won't be very nice, and a file will sort out most of this lot. Right, so that was me bashing my camera. I do apologise. Right. There we might just move that a little bit. There we are. So I'm just now going to trim these edges off. It doesn't. There we are. Better, and that will just give me a nice edge and help burnish those edges onto the papers into the, and I'm not going to worry about the MDF. I could have painted it, but I've actually made a very pointed decision of I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so let me see where we're up to. I have to take my knife back to those. So yeah, we're just going to sit here now, and there's going to be quite a lot of sanding. But if you're going to do a project like this, there are two choices. One is you mix media it, and you avoid, you just apply paints and pastes. Which would work quite nicely. There we are. Let's just grab a pair of scissors. There we are. And the other is that you just resign yourself to the fact that you are going to be doing a bit of sanding. She says having broken her nail file, but that's okay. There we are. Let's just go around it logically. There we are. We'll need to be slightly careful of that spike, otherwise we might break it off, which wouldn't be the best plan for the top of the lighthouse. There we are, and the shape will return. Some of these will be a lot easier. I've picked, there are a few pieces that I'm not going to hide from the fact are going to take a wee a wee minute or two. The Lighthouse definitely being one of those. But it's actually, to be fair, it's the only one that's really got lots of intricate spaces on it that are going to need to be cleaned up. And could I have made myself? No, I couldn't really, because these pieces are going to, the next bit, which is the more fiddly bit, is actually going to be cut definitely out and about. So let's just add see if we can take a bit more. That was my knife blade breaking. And that's fine, that just means I need to get a new blade into there, which I'll swap in a minute. I felt the spike, the tip of it bite in. It's one of the reasons why I tend to prefer to use a glass cutting mat rather than one of these, because the blades stick into these, and they're called self-healing mats because the gap where the blade is gone closes together. It doesn't heal at all, it just becomes more and more scratched over time. I probably go through more blades with my glass mat, but there we are. Okay, shall we tackle the next bit that's difficult? We might as well, mightn't we? Let's just tidy those up. And it's just worth spending the time to have it nice and tidy. And you can get little craft files. In fact, have I got one working over there? That's going to be easier, isn't it? There we are. Some of these are very old though. There we are. That's going to be easier as I can see it. So we now have our lighthouse reasonably clean. Not completely, but that's okay. That will do. Hello Tamar, welcome. Good afternoon, Kiki as well. Let's just grab a little thing. So I'm going to come back to my faded jeans ink pad, and we're just going to give our house a little bit more blue. As I say, the alternative for these is definitely to use your texture pastes and mediums. I do have in my stash, because I was sent them, the other house shapes, so we might well do another live. There we are. With those other shapes. So let's just leave that, and let's come back to, oh, she says seeing bits that she doesn't like. There we are. Am I a perfectionist? Yeah. No, that will do. Otherwise we will be here at tea time this evening. So this piece is definitely going to be a pain, isn't it? We can see that it's going to be a pain because we've got lots of holes. 1, 2, whereas lots of the others are definitely not going to be a pain. Did I think about this perhaps when I set out to do this? Of course I didn't think that it was going to take me for hours, well, forever. But there we are. Right, let's just come around there, come around that one, and notice that I move my paper to make my life easier. And so I'm working with what's going on. Right. There's little curved edges on these pieces. They're beautifully cut. They've got the average amount of MDF char. We're going to end up with, I'm going to end up with looking like a snowstorm of bits. Obviously I am, because why wouldn't I? Here we are. Let's just get rid of that piece. There we are. So that's working quite nicely, is that poke, cut and poke. And this is, apart from the boat, this is the only really, and the lighthouse is the only one that's going to be a real fiddle for anyone. Some of the others are some of the others are maybe not quite as fiddly as this, because they don't have these cut out areas to deal with. But yeah, there we are. Let's get rid of that piece. Yeah. Okay. So that is our top of our lighthouse. So let's just give this a little coat. There we are. So to me it almost looks like we've got railings. Do have a little bit of white inside at the top, which I'd like to get rid of. There we are. Happy Easter. So absolutely, it's Stamperia Silent Sea collection, which I am taking to Hobby Maker on Thursday, because the lovely Leonie has double booked herself. You can't manage it. Hey ho. So I've won the straw. I will let you decide whether it's long or short. Okay. So I'm going to pop that. So my question is, do I want to pop it that way or that way on there? I think I'm going to pop it that way, because it looks like a bit like balustrades then. Let me just tidy up that bit, just that little bit more. There we are. There we are. So it's Silent Sea collection. I am going to look like we've had a snowstorm. I can guarantee it. We are going to look like we've had a snowstorm. There we are. And let's just pop all of those through there. And let's line that up. There we are. Cool. Okay. So we've got some more bits that go on there. It's just as well I know which bits went where, isn't it? The house map, the let's just take off the worst of this, and then we'll come down to because curved areas you're never going to be able to get completely smooth with anything other than a file, are you? You see? There we are, there we are. Right, eeny me, where is the file? There we are. I think it's going to be quite nice to see how this all comes together with the different layers as we go. Let's do this one, and we'll tackle some windows. There we are. I clearly didn't get that lined up completely smoothly, but hey ho. Right, eeny meeny miny. Let's pop that way round. So they fit in a specific area based on the width of the piece of the base MDF. So there we are. That can sit there. And I think that looks quite nice. And let's just pop this one on lower down. That one I'm just going to have hanging slightly over. There we are. Okay. So we now need the beach hat, the door, and this one we've done in different, well, on the opposite side of that paper. This is, yeah, you know, if you've got single-sided papers, because you're primarily a card maker and you don't need things to be double-sided, then use those. There's lots of different variations in the pads. There we are. It's not going to take us forever, I don't think. Well, I know it won't take us forever. There we are. So let's just pop. That's going to look quite nice there. It's just a different way of assembling. Let's just pop that onto there. Right, so we now need those two. And those two. I think all four of those are. So on the back of the paper packet, so this is the one I'm using, the Lighthouse landscape. Actually, let's take it out the packet, because then you won't get so much glare, and I'm not going to need the packet anyway. There we are. So I'm using Lighthouse landscape here, but there's a tower landscape, a houses landscape, bell tower and bridge landscape. I'm going to do that one, I think, in some rose perfume papers back, because I've got the background papers, so I think that will work. So there are a fair number of bits, and it's never going to be a 2-minute project, but you know, think about maybe a plaque for someone who's moved into a new home. It would be quite nice, wouldn't it? Yeah. Oh, who's messaging me? I cannot tell because I's live. My phone is set to silent, which is cool for lives, so I don't get disturbed with notifications. I haven't worked out, probably because I'm the Muppet, how to switch off notifications on my computer. So there's one. Let's just do these. So there we are. So you've got a little guide as to what to do and where to put. And I think yeah. And then really what you do with each of them. They're relatively small. I don't think they're big enough to work as as the base for a proper, you know, a photo album. Though one of the bigger the houses landscape and the tower landscape ones might just be big enough to do as albums, rather than having to do them as just scenes. So there we go. I'm going to put one of you there and one of you there. And we're clearly not going to get too into there, even though the imagery shows, and that's because I've popped this lower down than it's suggesting, but that's also okay. Get a curve. We can tackle that, because we can do something different, can't we? There isn't a right or there isn't a wrong. So there we are. Lots of little pieces. So I've deliberately chosen to go with, there we are, because we'll swap it around and we're not going to do it exactly as they've said because of where I've put the door, but that's okay. There we are. Good afternoon, Maxine. Welcome, my darling. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Much appreciated. Always is. I know that sometimes holiday times can be just difficult for people, can't they? So there we are. There we are. So there we are. We're going to pop that. We're going to pop that there. There. So let's just line these up. So we've got our, let's just make sure it's reasonably central in there, as there's any one of them. You either have to be completely reasonably central or completely offset. Yeah. And I'm sticking MDF to paper, so I don't need any heavy body gel. Just need to stick those, so as long as they look straight to my eye, I shan't be too bothered. There we are. Hopefully. There we are. Let's just pop that there. So we've got our little windows in place, and our house number 1 sorted. Right. Oh yes, we have got the words up the right way. I thought for a minute when I turned this over I was going to have the words up the wrong way, but fortunately I haven't, because that would really irritate. Big stuff irritate. And then I'd be hoping that no one else noticed, except that I'm way too honest, and I'd be telling everyone I put the paper on around the wrong way. There we are. Now I wanted the lighthouse predominantly blue, but actually I think I want the houses to have blue on the accent, but just to be difficult I'm going to go brown for the edges, because why do the same thing for everything? So let's just pick up that. I thought I had out vintage. I did have out vintage photo. As I say, it's my go-to brown is vintage photo. So let's just add some brown onto this. It's just that they're going to be different, and having found you inevitably have a white edge. There we are. So that could be that piece, and then we need the roof for that piece, and this one. Oh dear, oh dear. So that will be the roof. this looks almost like a canopy, and I guess you could actually attach this partly onto the side of the lighthouse if you really wanted to. That would also work, but right. Aha! You see, you didn't cut that. Because I've done it like this, I've got these pieces all contained in, so it minimises the risks of bits going walkabouts, doesn't it? We're not going to be wasting masses and masses of paper this way. If you wanted, you could draw around each piece and then cut out each piece exactly and then glue it in place. I know that I'd still end up with it wonky and needing to file it down, so I just short circuit that extra step because it just seems to me to be sensible to if you know you're going to end up filing anyway, not to add an extra couple of steps into the process. Right, that's the blue. There we are. So let's just take that and pop that onto that. There we are. Right, whilst that is sitting, we'll happily do these pieces. Yeah, we're going to be here a wee while, aren't we? Because we've still got 2 more houses to do, but that's okay. So in the packaging that this came in, the big pieces were separate in the packaging, and then the smaller pieces were all in a separate plastic bag so that they don't spill out everywhere. You have to make a positive decision to open the bag, so that's quite well thought through. There we are. Aha! You see? I had a feeling I hadn't emptied that one off properly. There we are. There we are, there we are. So has everyone had their Easter dinner, or are you having it later? There we are. So that's just going to go there like a porch, so it's partly off. Yeah? Line up the legs with the edge. There we are. Okay, so that now needs a door and a square window. Oh, that's what I've done with that. It's all right. I'm just at that point. I'm thinking, what have you done? You've put the roof somewhere else for the other two, but there they are. They're on the side. It's a question of having too much stuff out, isn't it? There we are. Just give that onto there. You've not had your dinner yet. And what are you having, Sheila? What are you planning on having? And then we'll need so it's just as well there's a crib sheet for these, honestly, because you know, it's always helpful to have a crib sheet, isn't it? Of course it is. It won't take a silly amount of time once I've got all of these done. This is definitely the longest bit of this. It is doing all of this, but yeah, wouldn't be me if we didn't have a live that went on a bit, would it? So that piece is going to go into there. There we go. Reasonably central in there, and we need a square, and then that will be piece number 2. There we are. So you could, you know, you could do these in any theme to suit your home. If you've got a holiday home, this would look particularly nice. But if you know, if you prefer something softer, more, you know, more pretty, less blue. I mean, I think this colour palette is lovely. I have to say, it's nice, soft, grey blues. Oh, homemade soup, yummy, yummy. My daughter does a mean. I'm going to there we are, because it's square. It's actually a little shell, but I think it's going to work better up like that. So that's number 2. Happy Easter, Betty. And let's just trim this one off. See, that makes a big difference, have it, you know, being able to take the worst of it off with a knife and then just even it through. Yeah, say that the Lighthouse is definitely the piece that is going to take a bit more faffing with, purely because of the cutouts. Though you know, I'm sure there are ways around it if you wanted to. So that's just needs some brown around there. There we are. Let's pick the correct roof. And let's hope that I could put the paper on the correct side. Yeah. Oh, anyone would have thought I'd planned it. Anyone would have thought I'd planned it. So I don't generally bother buying expensive sanding tools. These are cheap emery files. I do have sanding blocks for furniture and bigger pieces, but for the finer work, these, you know, the emery boards just work absolutely fine, and they're as cheap as in fact they're cheaper than chips, because chips are now very, very expensive. There we are. And then we'll clear down in a minute, and then you'll be able to see what we've been, because I appreciate with all of the gubbins it's now looking a bit of a hot mess on my desk, but I've got bits that I definitely need to keep safe for the moment. There we are. And of course they're all asymmetric. There we are. So my little crib sheet tells me I need a door and a window. And it looks like I've managed to lose. Oh no, I have not managed to lose one. It's got a curved window. There we are. So there we are. Just to be difficult rather than a square window. So, if you bought these sets, what sets of papers would you be using? Good afternoon, Kay. Thank you very much. I liked your exploding pop-up gatefold. I have to say, I rather did quite like that. Now, I have to say that this piece, it's quite tight. It's not what it shows on the packaging. It shows there's definitely a gap, but it is definitely tight, so just be aware of that. So what papers would you choose if you were going to do these? I can think of lots of different ones. You know, choose the right papers, and maybe the houses and or the bell tower and landscape, and you could do steampunky quite happily. That would work. Where's my steampunk might be quite nice. Pretty rose perfume might be nice. I'm not sure that magic, I mean, you could do them in any papers you want really to decide which ones were going to work with the colours in your home. There we are. Yeah. Let's just pop that in the middle of there. There we are. Okay. Number 4, and then the boat. What's there, isn't it? There we are, and then we can have a tidy down of the mess. Get rid of all of this lot and all of the dust, because we've now got a lot of dust. And there we are. We're going to get the ink pads back, lids back onto our ink pads fairly soon too, so that we don't cream cracker them. Right. As I say, this is, you know, if it's easier for you to draw around and then cut out, you know, with a pair of scissors first, then obviously you do that. It's got to be what works for you, hasn't it, at the end of the day. Oh, not the brown buttons onto there. There we are. And I am deliberately sticking these down as I go, so that I don't end up with them all over the place, because I know what will happen if I'm not very careful is I will pop them down and promptly lose them, because, you know, why wouldn't you? There we are. That will work. I think that's working for me with the different colours. say that it's worth getting the background pad for these. There are extra patterns that are a bit more generic in the background pad than there are in the double-sided one. They're slightly different, and there's some extras, so it's worth in the backgrounds that are not in the standard papers. There we are. Right, well, we'll get rid of that mat in a minute because it's going to be in the way, and that means I can there we are. Right, so let's pop that on there, that on there, that can go there, those can go up there out of harm's way. Let's get these glued down. That bit, pop that knife where it's now safe, because that's the key, isn't it, when you've got a sharp blade, is to house it as soon as it is safe to do so. There we are. So you could spend ages lining each piece up so you get exactly which bit of the pattern you want, if that worries you. There we are. I'm going to pop that there. No, I'm not. I'm going to pop it up there because I think it looks better. And of course, I've forgotten the bolt. I forgot the bolt, having popped that away. I did and ah about not using the bow tie. It has to be sad. I think I might need to be treating myself to a new craft knife as well at the next paper craft show in Lee, because this one is definitely the hand. I might just go and get myself a surgical knife blade, Swan Morton, rather than having a fancy one, because so this is the other one that is inevitably going to cause a degree of angst with cutting out, ladies. So let's just get rid of the worst, and then we can I know Kay, you're a knife user, aren't you? You prefer. There we are. So let's just tidy up our boat. And that is our we'll need that one, the file. These I've had, well, they came from a company called Basic Grey. I think Kaisercraft had some as well, but I think if you hunt online you can find lots of Me Too's now, sets of little files, but generally I will manage with just a nail file, but there are some areas which is definitely easier. There, yeah. It's paper piecing by a different way, isn't it? Yeah. There we are. Let's just neaten that up a little bit. Neaten that. Right. That can now go away. And let's just use the ink that's left on that brush just to make our boat a bit more blue. And because they're uncoated papers, they take ink really well. Right, so we now have our components made. Right, let's just get shut of that mess. Do I have enough pairs of hands to move everything? No, of course I don't have enough pairs of hands to move everything. And if I stick that in my on the computer, all that will happen is... Right, what do I want? Oh, so let us come back to our piece, and then we can do a little bit of placing. There we are. And this is where my OCD brain went, maybe not. There we are. Excellent. And that will do. Of course it's not the end. There we are, but I think that's looking quite there. And I've deliberately got a wonky skyline, and I could put that up there, but it looks wrong and silly up there in the sea, so I'm going to pop it down there as if it's sort of the lifeguard's boat that has been pulled up on shore, rather than being a boat that's been out at sea, if that makes sense. Well, that's the story I'm saying in my head. Right. Right, I'm going to stand up. That's a bit of an effort too, isn't it? Yes, of course it is. So let's see what else we've got, because the eagle-eyed would have seen when I started the live that I had a whole mountain of die cut of the chipboard die cuts out. Am I a fan of these? Answer on a postcard. No. I find them quite chunky, but there are occasions when they are useful. So conveniently that sits there, that can sit there, and then I have, this is a piece of the ephemera, and when you look at the ephemera and people say what's the difference, this is a piece of ephemera, it's tiny, and this is a die cut chipboard. You can see how much thicker the two are. So generally I am a die cut, an ephemera is my preference. Now the headache, and I will be fair with the ephemera, is that it has a shiny surface, and therefore you cannot ink it. But let's pop that onto there conveniently. Right, let's come back to these. So I just went through. Now most of these words and things, they are there, they're on, in the ephemera, they're in the stickers, they're in the die cut. The die cuts and the ephemera have slightly different imagery, so just be aware. So that's going to go there. Let's just pop these in place. There we are. And I've deliberately got a wandering baseline, and that's absolutely completely intentional. There we are. Well, I obviously didn't stick that down, did I? No, of course I hadn't. There we are. Have it parallel to the bottom, otherwise it really will irritate me. And pop that there. Okay, so hi Anthony, welcome. So let's just pop that, because it's conveniently the same size, and we all have lots of memories from the seaside, don't we? There we are. that can go there. Right, and then let's do some baseline thing. And some of these are definitely wrong sizes, and that's absolutely fine. Okay, so let's just tuck that into there. I'm going to stick that one, tuck it into there. We're going to have let me see, I had it all worked out. That one can go there. There we are. We're doing some there we are, and pop that into there, and that one can go there. Don't want that one. Okay. So I will pop these in as I see fit. So that is a piece of stone, and I think we have another piece of stone, or a couple of pieces of stone. So let's just anchor that there. And there's another piece of stone. So let's just anchor that one there. So there are lots of different shapes, pieces, and that's fine. So they can go onto there. And I think I'm going to pop that piece is actually going to go upright with that there. Okay, it's a goodly starting point, isn't it? Will I remember it? Of course not. There we are. But I can tuck into that. Pot of succulents outside the house. There we are. Let's just shove. Make sure we've got stuff on there. There we are. Make sure it's upright. Right. Let's take our little stone. So adding the ink around the edges really does make such a huge difference to the pieces. Honestly, it does. There we are. There we are. I think the thing is, like with these pieces, because they're die cut chipboards, they're quite chunky, and if you don't edge them, then you end up with that quite a nice thick layer of white showing. And it's my personal feeling about it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's be everyone else's issue with it. Oh, that's what I did with it. But I think it's quite a thick white line to show, and when you've inked everything else up, you might not really want everything else, on display. That edge there. So that's why I've opted to do it the way I have. Let's pop that on the wonk. And I'm tucking things over and I'm tucking things under. And there are lots of stickers that I could use, but actually I've decided I was going to concentrate more on using the die cuts. As I say, they're not, I think they're working quite well because they're a nice comparison size to the you know, they're to the MDF pieces. They're not as thick as those, so they're helping to blend those in. There we are. Let's just get into there. So I think they have their place. Let's just pop that last one into there, and then we'll grab some. We will grab the resin, the tiny resin pieces that I got. So I wanted to link the boat in, so that's why I'm doing this. Okay, there we are. So the boat can be tucked into there, and then we need some extra bits. So we're going to start adding. I know I'm using PVA glue, but that's fine. Actually, it might not be fine. We might just grab my gel medium. Oh, ow. For this. I think Anthony's got a life, so that's crafty. Wednesday? I think it's Wednesday. Could be wrong. And I think he's using this collection. I've seen some prep for it, so let's just pop that piece into there. I haven't got masses of these pieces. I didn't want to have a live that was so completely full of red, yeah, partly because I didn't want it to take forever. There we are. I think we're going to leave that one there, and we'll clear that up. So, and we're not going to have any splashes. I know. Let me just grab, because we still need a bit of rounding. Of these pieces, and I do have natural shells, but I think there's enough shells in here as it is at the moment, so let me just add some little bits. So that boat is clearly going to be in the sand, yeah. So we're going to ground all of these pieces so they don't quite look like they're floating. So let's just pop some of this stuff into place. Because houses should not be floating, should they? There we are. Let's tuck that back into there. So we've got some vague lines on our piece of paper, so let's just use some of them. So when you're adding art stones, I've got 3 different shapes of art stone here, sizes of art stone here, then it's sensible to add the bigger ones first, yeah, when there's a maximum amount of glue exposed. Now some of these will fall off, and that's fine, but it's just going to add bits of texture. Stick that under there. So these will not all stay in place, but you can see now that we've got And sometimes I'll go along and I will literally put them one by one, but you know, sometimes life is too short. So that is the bigger ones. There we are, stick that underneath there. And then I have the small, which are a wee bit smaller. And we're just going to sprinkle these. They're going to sit where they're going. And I've got a tub that when I shake these projects off after lives, you know, when it's all had a chance to dry, because I'm not going to necessarily lift it all off now. That I've got the mixed sizes in, so you can see there's quite a variation in different sizes there. And then, so if you start with the big, when you've got the maximum amount of room, and then we've got some coarse powder, and I'm just going to pop this in, and it's going to grab to all of the spaces in between, and it's going to look sandy. There won't be quite as much when it's dry as there are now, but I'm using this to almost mop up the extra bits. There we are. So we'll give that a gentle shake. It might not be quite, I hope that we're not going to send too much stuff scattering around the place. We definitely won't get it all off now. There we are. Okay. So I will pop this ultimately into my mixed pot. So let me just pop that over there. So let's pop it over there, and then no doubt I'll pick it up. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is our make for today. That's definitely not sticking in. Okay, might be stuck in there. Is our piece made with Silent Sea collection, using the Lighthouse Seascape. Oh, well, there you are. There's another misbehaved one of those. Let's just stick that in there whilst the going is good. Having gone to the effort of painting it, we might as well stick it in. There we are. Tuck into there. The die cuts, chipboard pieces, that's a little piece of ephemera, and there we are. So we hope that you like that. We've got our beach boat, our sea theme behind it, and then the little bits and pieces as if we're walking maybe along an exotic seafront, I wish. Anyway, that is the make for day. And I think that it should be good. Remember, I am on Hobby Maker on Thursday at 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock. I have some lots of different demos planned for then, and lots of samples made. So I do hope some of you will be able to join me. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves. Remember to look after yourself and those around you. Let me just move this around. There we are, and then I can get back to my camera system. Well, possibly. It's deciding not to be a pain again. Oh dear. So, yeah. Right. Come on. I don't know what's going on there. Aha, there we are. Now it's decided it will behave. Of course it will. There we are.